Welcome to our media briefing. This is Friday, week 5. We got a week and a half, well, almost 2 weeks left to go. We're going to spend more time on the floor, passing bills over to the House, less time in committee as we go into next week. And then the last week, we pretty much spend all the time out on the floor passing bills. And we'll end up probably passing 450 to 500 bills again this year. We'll balance a budget, of which we are now working on. We'll be meeting with the House next week to determine where we have commonality and where we have dissent on what we should fund. And I know the Democrats have been working on a budget. Senator Escamilla is with us today from a minority party, and we appreciate her being here. I think we'll just go ahead and open it up for questions from our media, and then if anybody who's watching us over the internet or listening to us, please send in your questions. We'll give it our best shot to answer those questions. Media questions?
Lisa joked about the tax bill.
I thought she was joking about the alcohol bill.
I put that in at the end. It'll come out at the same time.
The tax bill, okay.
Yeah.
So which alcohol bill though? There's another one, so.
The elusive tax bill and alcohol bill.
So
Yes, sir.
What's the status of that? We're looking at next week.
I'm working with House leader, a couple members of House leadership we've got the fiscal analyst doing, I think we're hoping some final analysis of the last idea we came up with, and I think if we've got something there, then we'll move forward.
And that last idea is the adjustment on the income tax?
Yeah, we're looking at the sales tax on food. There's really that's pretty straightforward. The income tax is the real challenge, and we have a fiscal analyst who's deputized with the tax commission, and so they can run any scenario right through actual tax data. And it's very private data, and so you have to be deputized to be able to do that. But they run all these scenarios with actual tax data, so we know exactly what the effects will be. It isn't, we're guessing on what the effects will be. We know what the effects will be.
And that's data on shifting that threshold for the phase
Right,
out.
trying to flatten the tax,
And whether
maybe
it's
lower the
incremental or-
lower the rate. It's the whole broaden the base, lower the rate. That's our objective. If we're not going to have that objective, then there's no reason to change what we have.
Through the phase out of the credits, right?
Yeah, it's the credits make the system more volatile. Flat tax is the most predictable and least volatile revenue stream that you can create. And Illinois actually has as close of a flat tax as any state in the country. We tried to model after them back in 2007, and we weren't able to get there.
So if they have like a $9 billion deficit though?
Yeah, they lowered their income tax from like 5% to 3.5%. I believe that was the numbers.
Can I just ask a little bit about process? I know leadership was trying to work on something that would help show the legislature's commitment to reforming taxes and making changes to generate more money down the road for schools as part of this dealing with this whole initiative. But a lot of this was done behind closed doors. This isn't a typical process. You didn't study it in interim. You didn't come up with a bill and then have it go through the committee process where there would be debate back and forth. You've done this as a leadership team kind of on your own, bringing it to your closed caucuses. Democrats have not been involved, if I'm understanding correctly. Looking back, was this the best way to do this? I know it's more efficient when you do it that way, but
I don't know of any bill really that we pass that isn't drafted and well, some are not protected, but most issues are protected. And so the initial process is going to be in a protected situation. so that you can percolate it first, and then, eventually it's gotta be a public process.
You know,
And I've actually gone up and mentioned the basics and some of the details to our Democratic caucus. They asked me to come out and talk to them, and I should have just went up there on my own. We did the other day so that everybody's involved in this discussion. And eventually everybody does, but some of that initial percolation, you've got to, it has to be in a protected situation so you can even get anywhere with it.
But the public hasn't had a chance to have input on this.
Well, but they will before the end of the day. I mean, we're not gonna do this without some public input into it.
that'd be, there's no intention of doing that. And, but there has to be, like the president said, you have to find out what your idea is. And, I looked at how the Constitution came about. We had Articles of Confederation. They met for a long time trying to figure out the process. They met behind closed doors, in fact, really closed doors with guards on the door. And, the notes of one of the meetings were dropped on the floor, and nobody knows whose notes those were, because nobody had owned them, because nobody wanted to think that they violated, the process or the comments they were making. And this, the commitment they had among themselves. But when it came out, oh my heavens, that Constitution was beat up by the public pretty hard. It went to all the states, was ratified, amendments were made, and we've got to come up with a core before it goes out and gets beat up. And we expect our ideas to be vetted, but we've got to be able to come to it. I'm not sure any of us know where we're at yet. Until we know where we're at, it's really hard to go tell somebody where we're at. And so, and there has to be that process that goes on, and it happens almost with every idea that anyone has. Whether you're a legislator or outside, you've got to first formulate it and make a decision for yourself where you're at, and then you start to advocate for it. And we're going through that process, and there's nothing secretive about it. I would feel bad if anybody felt that, and if that's been the case, then perhaps we've given the wrong impression. But we're trying to come up with something in response to some concerns we have, and we need to be able to figure out a little bit of where we're at ourselves before we go out and start advocating.
Once we started talking about tax reform, and the word got out that we were trying to talk about tax reform, I started hearing from a lot of people who had their own ideas about how they wanted to do it. I mean, lots of different ideas, and of course everybody looks at their own situation for the most part. But to be able to get the core idea ready to go and be able to present it then for public consideration is where we're at right now.
I was just comparing it to the normal process. I mean, especially on this side, usually you are much more deliberative in terms of presenting something in bill form and going through the committee process and, understanding. And this is a big deal. I mean, this is a major change.
It's a big deal, no question.
In the tax structure.
I mean, the homeless situation that we had today, I think is a big a deal as anything that we're doing this session, and maybe in a decade. It's right up there at the top. But tax reform would also be included in that. But I kind of disagree with this idea that this has all just been closed, because we've been pretty open here about what's going on.
I do too.
And so, because conceptually, we're trying to broaden the base, we're trying to lower the rate, sales tax, restoring what we took off of sales tax, that's been very transparent. Nobody can say that they haven't heard that idea.
And we'll add, I guess we'll add that our caucus has talked to the president about some of our concerns and just concept-wise, in terms of the tax on food, so sales tax on food. So that's something we've mentioned from some of our caucus members. So we're waiting, obviously, for the details, but we're waiting, and we will speak. We will definitely, I think, be speaking up on the process in terms of when it gets here, when it gets to, I'm sure if it's going to a committee, that committee will participate in that conversation, and we're waiting for Senate floor, dialogue as well. And when he presented to our caucus, we expressed, just our point of view in terms of exemptions and the tax on food, which is, I know it's a concern for some of our caucus members.
Does your caucus have a position on
No.
that?
No, we don't, but I think just looking at the numbers, that will be probably our biggest concern. That's where we're, because we know we have to do something and broaden the broad of that base and trying to bring us more stability, and we get that stability as the big issue that we have, but that's probably where we're facing a lot of concerns.
You know, we've even had pros and cons right here
We have.
in this discussion here, as Senator Davis has been here and expressed, and Senator Escamilla. So I would disagree that we haven't been transparent in what we're trying to do. Now, some of the little details, the rates, what exactly will be the phase out, we've been pretty transparent about that too. We've talked about 75,000 to 100,000, maybe it's 125. We just haven't landed on any of that yet, but those are the things we're considering.
President, you earlier had said that you were trying to be really conservative about the income tax because you, as you termed it, it was a tax on productivity. Are you prepared to tell us that we're holding the line on that, or even thinking about reducing it?
Well, the revenue from income tax, we're not proposing anything to reduce revenue from income tax. We're trying to stabilize the revenue stream. I don't think we do anything less than revenue neutral. I can't see us doing a tax cut at this point, but I could see us broadening that base and lowering the rate in a revenue neutral situation, giving us a more predictable, less volatile revenue stream going forward. Something that would actually grow faster also because it has a lower rate to it.
And some of this isn't too hard to figure out. Not only, it's also a competitive event. If you're a CEO for a company and you want to locate in a state, and I'll over-exaggerate right now, that has a 20% state income tax, or you want to locate in a state without an state income tax. Now that's the extreme. That's not a hard business decision to make. And we have to be competitive in all our tax policies, whether it's gas tax or anything else, with competing states. And if we want to drive the economy in Utah, we have to be competitive also. And when we lowered our tax from 7.5% to 5%, that had a huge economic impact. And a lot of the economic strength that we've seen over the last years, I believe that is among many factors, is surely one of the big ones. And I think we have to be smart at how we do it. And we've talked before that income tax is one of those economic drivers. In addition to having it be a stable tax, we want to make sure it's competitive. And we're seeing our neighbors do away or lower their income tax. And we can sit back and watch, or we can, I say neighbors, there's 49 other states, and we can either watch or we can engage. And we think we ought to engage. And it's a hard process though. So anyway.
A lot of politics.
I understand
Other
from,
questions?
my schools now, our schools now, group that you've talked to them about switching to sales tax increase rather than an income tax increase. Can you talk about that?
We've talked about it before here. I had a conversation with them. There's nothing definitive that's ever been communicated, but I think that they're considering their options.
And why do you think that would be a better place to look at an increase? Because you're talking about a package that would actually decrease the rate.
And the reason why I think that if I were in their shoes, I would consider that is when I was chair of Revenue and Tax several years ago, we did an analysis on the most hated taxes. And the most hated taxes by far are, well, property tax. And then I was surprised to see there was gasoline tax. And then income tax, and then down below that was sales tax. And so people are more amenable, I think, to raising a sales tax than they are an income tax or a gas tax, or especially not property taxes. That's kind of the taboo. So that's why I think that would potentially be a consideration for them.
But you'd still want to see that done in conjunction with the adjustment you want to make to broadening the base with the food tax, and then you'd lower the rate, and they could ask voters if they want to raise it.
Well, I need to emphasize, we're doing this independently of our schools now. What our Schools Now initiative has done is caused us to think about what we're doing.
Yes.
And
Which stage?
we've done some analysis, and our fiscal analysis showing that we are going to cross some lines here in the next 2 or 3 years. One of those is, if we continue on the trajectory we're on, we lose our options, because higher ed will be completely funded out of the education fund. And that becomes a real choke point now for the legislature that has to deal with that.
Is it 2 to 3 years, you said, you've got left in the?
Yeah, well, I mean, if, I'm just looking at our budget this year, I
Yeah.
think if we continue this, it could happen sooner than later.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact numbers, but it's coming up on us
I think
quickly.
there's about 400 million left there, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
you're pulling it out about 125 a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, 3 years for, yeah.
And finally, on
That's
our
awesome.
Schools Now, I was able to talk to Gail Miller yesterday, as well as some other folks associated with the initiative. And it doesn't look like the proposal that leadership is looking at, it will be enough to stall their efforts anyway. You had that understanding, right? I
They
think
made
you
that very
expressed
clear, and I think I've made
Yeah.
that clear here also. that-
Yeah,
that
yeah.
the indications are now. I don't speak for them, but their objective is to get more money into schools.
And we all have our constraints. We have a 45-day legislative session, 33 days. We have legislators that are elected that reflect the will of who they believe they're elected to represent. And it is a dynamic. It's actually very exciting, and appropriately done is that we all play a role in it. And surely they play a role, and we totally respect their efforts, and we have done, and we will continue to do everything we can to try to do what's responsible.
Other questions?
Senator Adams, you're the Senate sponsor of Norm Thurston's
Yeah.
DUI bill.
Uh-huh.
How does that, is that in any way tied to what happens with Senator Stevenson and Representative Wilson's bill? I mean, do you think that moving the DUI rate, independent of any passage of liquor reform on the other end, is a wise move in terms of?
I don't think it's connected at all, unless somebody, surely Representative Thurston hasn't said there is, and I'm not aware of any connection there. But what I am aware of, and the reason I've taken an interest in it, is I've talked many times, and I don't want to continue to repeat, but I will, I suppose, at the risk of not being understood, is that I served for a couple of years on the Transportation Commission. In fact, I was there a month and asked the chair. But it was very sobering for me, and you can go to a Transportation Commission if you want to, meeting next month. And I can tell you what the first item is on the agenda. And the first item on the agenda is the number of fatalities. And when I was chair, we had consistently, some months 30, some months 10, but consistently every year about 240 people were killed on Utah's roads. And as I looked at that, UDOT went to work, and you've seen the campaign of 0 fatalities. That isn't a slogan. They put cable barrier in, they put concrete barrier in, they've done advertising. But, whether it's, the difference between whether that's important or not sometimes is whether it's your relative or your friend or your family member or not. If you're one of the 240, it's a big deal. And when you look at DUI fatalities, it's predicted that there's between 10 and 15% of those 240 that are DUI related. And you look around the world and you see Europe, that's 0.05. You see Canada, 0.05. And you see United States at 0.08. I'm trying to figure out why we're there. And I think it's something that's very worthwhile in looking at. And I think if you could save 240 times 10%, that's 24 people. If it's me, I think it's a big deal. If it's you, I'm not sure. I mean, but so look at it any way you want, and I
No,
think
we
it's a
really
big
care
deal.
about you.
Okay. So you can.
That's why we're gonna lower it.
So hopefully, and a connection, I'm not aware of any. So.
Senator Escamilla, you talked about this in your caucus?
No, we're waiting for the bill. We know what the bill is. We're hearing from our constituents, and you know their concerns about the nanny state. You know, but we also passed a helmet bill, so we want to bring some balance. But I think we're in the conversations with just our interns getting the emails and phone calls and everything. We're having the conversation in our next caucus meeting. But we know it's real. We also have a lot of, we've been very pushing on the seatbelt laws. I mean, we believe that there's pieces where public safety is critical, but at the same time, I guess one more concern is on tourism, as we have an odd, reputation with regards to, being able to access for purposes of, liquor. So that's obviously a concern as well. And we hear from some of the restaurants and businesses that they feel that may hurt their businesses.
Yeah, and I wonder, tourism in France and Italy, if it's been hurt, or whether you're not able to get a drink in France or Italy, or Toronto, or Quebec, or Calgary, or, around the world. It's.
But do you think Utah becoming the first in the country to have a .05? Obviously, that's going to be.
I've been told this. Somebody verify it for me if you would. I've been told it's anecdotal. I'll probably get the data, but I heard we were the first .08. And now, if that's, and the rest of the nation followed us. We've been the first in a lot, and somebody help me with that. You can print it if you want, but that's at least the rumor I'm hearing is we were first on the .08.
Getting back to the Transportation Commission and your comments about that, if the larger number of fatalities is in speeding, which I think the data probably underscores, then raising our speed limit to 80 miles an hour in kind of opposition to the rest of the nation, is that a disconnect?
Well, we actually did the same thing when we raised that, and we actually didn't raise that arbitrarily. My memory tells me, and it's a couple years old now, is that we raised it in selective areas, and then we did studies. And the studies did not show that there were extra fatalities. So if there are, then we need to relook at the studies. But
It's because people were driving in 80 before.
they were. That could actually probably help somebody. So we can get UDOT in, and we'll talk to them, but I think that's anecdotal, but let's get the data.
Maybe I need to ask the restaurant bar people this, but does lowering the DUI rate or DUI level affect ram shop liability?
I don't know. I'm not an actuarial. I'm not an insurance guy. We'll have to talk to them. But whether it does or not, I think we're all striking at issues that I suppose are not they're relevant. But I believe the relevant issue on this is if you're going to take a drink, are you going to say, I think I can drive? And I think the answer to that is, if you take a drink, you probably shouldn't be driving. And when we allow people to be, to try to self-determine that once they've taken a drink, I'm not sure they're the best judge. And I think it's an issue. I think it's, obviously, as I talked before, it's an issue that has a fatality connected to it, and so I think it's a serious issue.
I don't think there's any question that I think it would create more risk for dram shop laws. But I don't think that that's a big concern, because our concern is that our roads are as safe as possible.
Yeah.
And I believe that number one
So
reason
we're going to get discussion.
on fatality is seatbelts. And I run for, I think, 5 years or 6, primary offense on the seatbelts. I know, we end up in a compromise with Representative Perry's bill, and we're happy there's something in place. But yeah, the number one reason is their seatbelt law.
Yeah, so,
And I think that
We passed
now that we
one.
passed that, I think it's gonna probably
Yeah,
stick,
you're
my
good, yeah.
guess.
and it'll be interesting to see whether people who support seatbelt laws and helmets laws will support .05.
Right, I was thinking the debate you had over texting, what, 2 years ago?
Texting.
Texting's another one.
Yeah.
We'll have a good discussion.
I guess we don't have any questions from anybody through the internet. Any other questions from our
Yeah,
media?
just
One last question.
The Clean Air Caucus was kind of interested in initial, or not initial, but ongoing thoughts about their efforts and yours specifically regarding the clean air bills that are working their way through in some capacity. Your thoughts on that as an overall
I think-
effort? Are we making better progress this year?
I think we could make as big a progress as we've made in a long time, because it's all about, the biggest issue is our automobiles and getting the very low to no sulfur fuels. And Senator Adams is fortunate that he's here to discuss that. He has a bill to try and incentivize our refineries to actually make that investment towards that. I'm told that it makes an 80% difference. I don't know if that's a fact, but if it's even a 50% difference, we've made one huge step in cleaning up the inversion error that we have. Of course, we can't legislate to get rid of an inversion. That's natural law. But we can keep the air as clean as possible on inversion and non-inversion days, so that we're doing our part for world clean air.
How committed is the Senate to getting those bills activated and
We are very committed to it.
Onto the governor's desk?
We've got our best sponsor running it. Senator Adams.
So, yeah, I think we're committed to the bills, but the Senate President's talking about an idea that we think is extremely significant. Tier 3 fuels has been talked about. We know that our refineries, there's some federal regulations or requirements, but we know that it's, I think the federal government's required around an 85% compliance. We have small refineries here, so they can, because their refineries are small enough that they could fall into that 15% gap of non-compliance. We feel like we have a greater need than anywhere else in the country because of our inversion that we get over the couple of months in the winter. So the idea is that we try to get the refineries to actually move to Tier 3 fuels. And we've talked about 3-year economic life, that again, good tax policy is you don't tax inputs, because when you do, you make people less competitive because you raise the cost of product. And there's multiple ways to get to the Tier 3 fuels. One is using a catalyst that has less than a 3-year life. And so it's expensive for them to do. And if we actually, the manufacturing bill that actually has a fairly significant fiscal note, about $60 million. If we focused on the refineries and tried to look at what is good sound economic policy by giving those manufacturing segment that 3-year economic life, the deduction on their sales tax, but requiring them to, or motivating them to actually produce Tier 3 fuels, we may get what I would say is a win-win. Win, good tax policy, but also a win in getting Tier 3 fuels produced by those refineries. So that's the idea, and I think it's a worthwhile project, and I'll probably be creating a substitution in my bill that does that. So,
How much would that take out of the sales tax base?
1.9 million is the fiscal note.
Is that per year?
Well, I don't have fiscal notes, so I probably shouldn't quote that totally, but the estimate
Because you talked about a 3-year.
I'm giving an estimate, okay,
Yeah.
so I want to be
Yeah.
as transparent as possible.
Sure.
But the estimate is about $1.8 or $9 million, yeah.
Annually.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
So that's apart from the other manufacturing type of,
It would probably ebb and flow though in actual implementation.
So again, that's good policy, because again, you're not taxing inputs, you're doing what we believe is making us more economically competitive, helping manufacturing industry, which creates jobs, and we're cleaning up the air.
So you wouldn't put that in the exemption or credit category that's gonna be reviewed this interim?
You know, if we do it, it'll probably be on the list. I don't think we take anything off the list. If people don't think it's right, we'd probably review it, but I'd review everything.
Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for being with us. We'll see everyone on Monday.
It's got to pass first
Remember,
too, though.
you heard it first. Senate media briefing.
Availability, yeah.
Thank you.